This episode brought to you by Skillshare. Classes taught by expert practitioners for your career or for your passion. Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to. Well, some time has gone by since the release of The Rise of Skywalker, and not surprisingly, there's been a lot of reactions to it. Some love it, some hate it, some are halfway, which given the Star Wars climate online is not that shocking. But there has been one argument that's been coming up when talking about the new Star Wars trilogy, and that's praise for the Star Wars prequels. Where did this come from? I thought there were rules. Han shot first. It's hilarious we thought lightsaber gate would be the biggest problem with the new trilogy. And the prequels suck. There's just some things I thought we all agreed on. With their wooden acting, lame dialogue, over-reliance on CG, and inconsistent stories, how are these suddenly being seen as good? Are they the worst thing ever? No. In fact, I even did a video praising the good elements in them. But we're gonna use the G word when describing these?
I don't like sand.
These?
More did you speak?
These?
Are you an angel? What?
Well, here's the funny thing. After completing this new trilogy, I was forced to look at the prequels again. I mean, it is 3 new films in a now 9-film lineup. Most people know the original trilogy very well, but when you see a character enter the new trilogy that was not only in the original but in the prequels too, it's hard not to think how all of these films might work as one narrative. What flows in the long run, but not in the short run, and vice versa. In doing so, and seeing more and more arguments pop up that there was something important in the prequels that wasn't in the sequels, a part of me kinda, sorta, maybe knows a little bit what you're talking about. But probably not! Sure, I've had my ups and downs with this new trilogy, but there's none of them I hate, and parts of them even gave me goosebumps that I can't remember feeling in Star Wars since the original trilogy. However, and I can't believe I'm saying this, there was something missing that the prequels seemed to have. It wasn't until I saw the conclusion, Rise of Skywalker, that I finally felt this, but I did feel it. That being an emptiness. A lack of passion, the feeling that this isn't being made to delight the imagination anymore. But the prequels had that? They weren't empty?
I have a bad feeling about this.
I don't sense anything.
They didn't lack passion?
You're so beautiful.
It's only because I'm so in love.
No, it's because I'm so in love with you.
They were made to delight the imagination?
Someone to see you, honey!
Obi-Wan!
Hello, Dex.
I argue, yes. Not done well, but I did still nevertheless get that feeling from them. Okay, to better explain what I'm talking about, we have to go over the trilogies really quick. I'm aware you know them inside and out, but to get a better idea, we really do have to recap them. The first Star Wars took the world by storm, but as many have pointed out, even the actors, it was the imagination and effects that drew everybody in, not necessarily the writing, at least with the dialogue.
I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
The film is masterfully edited though to incorporate the best elements and leave out this shit.
You know, they've already started to nationalize commerce in the central systems. I may never come back, and I just want someone to know.
Giving us the best production you could get from such a creative mess. In Empire Strikes Back, more chances were taken and they learned from what worked and what didn't. So they knew what to take risks on and what not to. As proved, Star Wars wasn't just a lucky break, there was a continuing talent behind it. Return of the Jedi was kind of a combination of the two, returning back to what was popular in the first films with the kid-friendly creatures and blowing up another ball, but it also incorporated some of the darkness from Empire. Not perfect, but a pretty damn good beginning, middle, and end. When the long-awaited prequels came out, everything that was edited out of the first Star Wars was now put dead center. A lot of trade talk, a lot of scenes that went on too long, putting too much comedy in one character, leaving no personality for the others. Fans went through different stages of accepting that after all these years they got something that could be bad. There's even been films made about their different levels of denial. The next film, Attack of the Clones, scaled down some of the comic relief and trade talk, but not much else. The plot was still confusing, the dialogue still awkward, and the energy from the actors still on autopilot. In my opinion, this is the worst one because it's not even a so bad it's good, it's just dull and lifeless. But at the very least, the next one, Revenge of the Sith, did generate a lot of life.
So long ago when there was nothing but our love.
In certain parts. There was more focus on the villain, who's always been a ton of fun in these movies. It felt like there was conflict that, while clumsy, you could still follow. And it did take the darkest risks out of all the movies. I mean, yeah, this boy says his line weird.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Great read, kid, that was 1 in a million! But he's dead, the following scene. You never see that in the original trilogy. Kentucky Fried Ewok, sure, but a kid? Let alone kids? Yikes. A lot of people say this is the closest prequel to feel like a legit Star Wars film. But that's the word, closest. The prequels were still seen by many as a huge letdown. Slowly over time, critics and audiences were seeing the chinks in the armor and realized this wasn't the epic comeback they were expecting. There is one group that surprisingly enjoyed them though. Kids. Yeah, I can't say I'd be into trade talks and Senate meetings, but a lot of children still got sucked into the sword fights, the ship battles, and yes, even the comic relief. I guess I can compare this to when I was a kid and hearing all the political talks in Batman, or the archaeological talks in Indiana Jones. It was the grown-up stuff you waded through to get to the action. Where in those films, though, the adults could see how they connected to the story and character's journey, these films, they couldn't. But if you were a child, what did it matter? There was more color and fast imagery and poop jokes to entertain you. Fair enough, if you enjoyed these as a kid and hold fond memories of them, rock on. A lot of children, as they got older though, did see the problems with them that adults have for years, but nevertheless, many still hold on to their nostalgia and enjoy watching them. So one of the major questions becomes, is nostalgia the only benefit of the prequels? Well, let's look at the new trilogy to figure it out. After several spin-offs in TV, games, books, and God knows how many other avenues, Lucasfilms was eventually bought out by Disney, with plans to keep George Lucas, the creator, but also to some the destroyer of their beloved series, out of it. With the release of Force Awakens, there was no doubt a return to several elements that people have been missing from the prequels. On top of great acting, charming dialogue, and more balanced humor, practical effects were utilized more, the look and tone was more rugged and familiar, and even characters from the original came back for another go. A lot of fans, including myself, found this almost a little too familiar. The biggest criticism is that it was basically the original film all over again, with a poor youth in white battling a bad guy in black trying to get a droid to an underground army to defeat another giant bowling ball. While many had issues, there was this understanding that, well, it just wanted to show it could do Star Wars like the good old days. The version everyone seemed to like the most. A lot of us gave him the benefit of the doubt and said, okay, you get this one, but now you have to do something different. And I guess that's what we got with The Last Jedi. Divisive, to say the least, the same elements some hailed as deep and challenging, others saw as shallow and backstabbing. When I first saw it, I remember being super invested and intrigued by some of the new directions they were setting up. But like many of you, the more I thought about it, the more I did see a lot of problems. So much was wrapped up that the previous film was clearly establishing to be resolved in 2 movies as opposed to 1. And even what did wrap up seemed to subvert expectations, but not really replace it with anything epic. Sure, 1 or 2 surprises that don't give you what you're promised is fine, but this is kind of like doing Endgame without having Thanos or getting the characters back. There's just some things you know you have to follow through on. But it's all good. This is a franchise that's inspired tons of books that took finished stories and continued them in the most brilliant of ways. They can still turn this into something. Well, Rise of Skywalker was something, alright. Again, dividing a lot of people, though I don't think as much as Last Jedi. The film tried to introduce both old and new elements, combining familiar tropes from the original trilogy with the tropes of this new trilogy, in the hopes of ending on a strong yet familiar note. From what I've gathered, even the people that like this film don't love it. And the answer why is very clear. It just didn't feel like this was planned from the start. Where Last Jedi almost seemed to retcon some ideas from Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker seemed to retcon ideas from Last Jedi. Despite the director of the mostly crowd-pleasing Force Awakens coming back for this one, people just didn't feel the same excitement for this conclusion. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's crowds that applauded and liked the movie a great deal, but I get the feeling it's not the same level of excitement that people felt in The Force Awakens, when so much was possible and on the horizon. Why is this? Well, let me ask you a question. Whose movies are these? I don't mean who financed them or owns the rights or anything. I mean, if you were to ask whose films the original trilogies were, the answer would be obvious. Lucas. Sure, other people directed some of the movies and wrote them, and even Lucas himself changed the size of character roles based on fan reaction. But behind it all, it was still his idea, his dream that, for better or worse, was the driving force behind it. Now here's the thing, do I think they can't do a new trilogy without Lucas? No. Again, look at some of the books that have come out. These are fantastic stories written by completely different people. I do think, though, that with a series like this that started out so personal, it needs a personal touch all the way through. Had the films all been under J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson from the beginning, I feel like we would have gotten something more consistent and meaningful, whether we would have liked them or not. But it kept jumping back and forth between different creators, so it felt there was no clear vision from beginning to end. Now, like I said, they were also changing a lot in the making of the original trilogy. Oh, you knew Luke and Leia were gonna be brother and sister from the start? Bullshit!
My sister has it.
Somehow, I've always known.
That just makes that creepier. You could even argue that Lucas having too much control hurt the franchise greatly, but it was still under somebody's vision. And I think that's what the prequels have over the new trilogy, a consistent vision. Is it good? I don't think so. It still seems clumsy, confused, and constantly misdirected. But you always felt like this was one person's passion project, made to please the creator as well as the audience. Imagine if other filmmakers rushed in to save the room. Of course there's people that can make the film more coherent and logical, but you would lose that unique vision that nobody else has, even if it's awful. What if other filmmakers stepped in to take over Ed Wood's production of Plan 9 from Outer Space? We'd probably have a middle-of-the-road B movie that quickly be forgotten, instead of an epic disaster that's pleased people for years because of the passion that was put into it. Even if it was a misdirected passion, it was a passion from the heart. I'm not saying giving control to Lucas would have fixed this new trilogy.
You are in big doo-doo this time.
Just seems very unlikely. But it arguably would have been more interesting to see the crazy stuff he would have come up with rather than just others trying to recreate what's worked before. There's certainly repeating in the prequels, but not like the repeating in the new trilogy. The prequels weren't good, but they were a fascinating experiment in what happens if you just let one guy, after years away from directing, do whatever he wants. Anakin's journey in the prequels has similarities to Luke, but it's still a different story. Rey and Kylo, the more the films continue, basically go through the exact same journey as Luke and Vader. If there's one thing I can't say about the prequels is that they just do the original trilogy again. Granted, the differences were lame, and that's a big part of what caused people to hate them, but they weren't just a carbon copy and somebody made them for the same reason he made the originals, because he had a story to tell. These feel like a studio made them to make money. Now granted, it's a studio trying to give creative control to clearly talented filmmakers, but there's no fixed goal figured out from the beginning that drives the passion. When you think of the Marvel movies and how much they had to plan out ahead of time for them to work and connect, it's still mind-blowing. Tons of movies mapped out, granted not all of them good, but still with a clear goal to reach and only a few hiccups along the way. That's impressive, especially when you consider all the creative voices they worked in. This was 3 movies. Only 3! And they clearly didn't have an idea of where they were going with them. I know things were changed up in Marvel when a movie underperformed or an actor dropped out or whatever, but again, they had a general roadmap of where they needed to get to. These movies didn't seem to have a map. Rather, they started making up their way, got lost a few times, and then acted like this was always the best route. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it's good just to make up the path as you go. Hell, we've gotten some great movies out of that, even incorporating different creative voices. But in this case, it didn't pan out. I think part of that is because this all came from a source that had a personal touch. Again, whether for better or worse. And that is something that's missing from these new films. So, do I think the prequels are good?
This is such a drag.
But I do get more of a connecting passion for storytelling than I do from this new trilogy. Every one of those feels like an assignment. First one is, how do you get people back into a dying franchise? Second one is, how do you try something new while also connecting to something old? And the last one is, how do you attempt to make everybody happy? There was never a feeling of somebody wanted to tell a story just because they wanted to. It felt more like they wanted to breathe energy back into a profitable franchise. Was it all bad? I don't think so. I think a lot of scenes from this new trilogy have some amazing moments. Some more than others, but I don't see any of them as a complete loss. However, now that they're wrapped up, they don't feel as epic or touching as they could have been. I guess in a lot of ways it makes sense. The originals are seen as incredibly good, the prequels as incredibly bad, and these are somewhere in between. But for those saying there was an important element to the prequels that was missing from the new trilogy, I do think you're onto something. The prequels are a mess, but it's George Lucas's mess, and whether he's being praised or despised, he has always taken responsibility for it. Where it kind of feels like nowadays more and more people are trying to point fingers at who screwed up where. For all the prequels' faults, they are their own thing. You always feel Lucas's thumbprint on every frame. Even in the original, despite Lucas's control having more influence in other films, you always got the feeling there was one storyteller behind it all. These other films feel like there's several because, well, there were several. Some cut, some brought back, some making things better, while others making things worse. So while the new trilogy is all over the place, the prequels did at least stay in one controlled realm. And if you like that realm, awesome. If not, there's more than enough people who agree with you. So I guess it's pick your poison. You can either have a disastrous prequel series that's consistent with what it is, or a more competent series that never had a solid finish line ever drawn up. Or, watch good films from beginning to end. I guess everyone is going to take something different from each movie. But whatever trilogy you like the most or hate the most, one thing is for certain. McClunky will always be stupid. No! I will fight you to the death on this! I'm the Nostalgia Crick, and I will fight you to the death on this! McClunky, what the dick?